Masech the Shavias, Perek Hey, and we're up to Mishnah. Oh, 1 second. We're up to Mishnah Vav, page 447 in the Mishnah Behira. As we mentioned yesterday, we skipped for now Mishnah Beis, Gimel, and Dalid, and Hey. In Perek Hey, it deals with an onion called a luf, and it's a type of onion that they used to preserve. They would plant them, buy them, and these things would last a long time before modern refrigeration and modern cupboards, etc. They would preserve this luf by putting it underground, and it would last there for a long time. So you bought a couple of pounds of luf, you buried them in your backyard, and every so often when you needed some luf, you took them out of the ground. The problem is, if you have luf and you put it into the ground, permitted luf, but you have it and you put it in the ground during Shemitah, you have all kinds of problems. It looks like you're planting, and then the luf itself starts growing new luf, and then the luf is Shemitah luf. And then there's biur problems, and we haven't learned the rules of biur yet, and that's later in the Masechta, although we're going to touch on a rule of biur today. Separate rule about Shemitah, which we will at least identify today. So we will come back to those Mishnayos when we learn the rules of biur. For now, we're going to go to Perek Hey Mishnah Vav, page 447. As we mentioned yesterday, the topic here is selling farm utensils, agricultural utensils, lending utensils to people who you suspect are not Shomer Shvius. So they walk into your Ace or your Home Depot during Shemitah, and they want to buy sickles or pruning tools. Can you sell these kind of tools to a person who you suspect does not observe Shemitah? If you sell him the tools, he may use it to violate Shemitah, and then you have an issue of lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. The Torah says you should not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. And Chazal teach us that the meaning of that pasuk is you shall not put a spiritual stumbling block in front of a person who is blind to the seriousness of what he's doing. So you cannot do something that will assist someone in doing an Aveira. Now there's two sides to this coin. One is called Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Michshol. You don't put a stumbling block in front of someone, and you don't put a stumbling block in front of someone that would result in that person doing Chas v'Shalom and Aveira. You cannot be an accessory to a person doing Aveira. The flip side of that is something called Misayeya Yedei Over Aveira. You assist someone in doing an Aveira. They are not exactly the same concepts. Tosfos talks about it in Shabbos. We're not going to go into it for us right now. The concept is Lifnei Iver Lo Sitein Michshol. You shouldn't sell these kind of implements to a person who you suspect violates Shemitah, because you're helping him by selling him the tools to violate Shemitah. So page 447, Mishnah Vav. Elu hen kelim she'ein ha'uman rashai lemachram b'shvius. The following are the types of implements that a professional, somebody has a professional goods store, he sells farm items, agricultural items. The following are the items that you cannot sell to an Am Ha'oretz, or someone that you suspect doesn't know the laws of Shemitah, or someone you suspect intentionally violates the laws of Shemitah. These are the tools you cannot sell them. We have pictures of these tools at the bottom of page 448. You cannot sell them a macharesha, a plow, v'chol keleha, and all the accessories that go with a plow. So if you take a look in the Mishnah tells you now what are the accessories that come with a plow. Ha'ol, the yoke that connects the animal to the plow. Vahamizre vahadeker. So if you take a look at the bottom of the page, you have a picture 142. You have the ol, the yoke. The yoke is that block that goes on top of the head of the animal. The decker, you can see they're pointing to you in the picture. That's the spiked piece of metal that's tied to the yoke. And as the animal walks, it schleps along that spiked piece of metal and it plows the ground. It turns the dirt over. So you cannot sell the yoke and you cannot sell the actual plow, that sharp edge piece of metal. What are you worried about? He is going to use these things to plow a field during Shemitah. People normally who observe Shemitah are not going into the Ace or Home Depot to buy a plow during Shemitah. It's useless. You can't do it. Why is this person interested in a plow during Shemitah? The reasonable suspicion is he wants to plow his field during Shemitah, and we don't assist him in doing that, so you can't sell that. Now the Mishnah says, Mizreh, on page 448, a Mizreh is a winnowing fork. Picture 143, a person has, he has grain, and they used to use this pitchfork, stick it into the pile of the grain, and then just flip the grain up into the air. This is one of the 39 malachas on Shabbos, Zoreh. What you do, what they accomplished by this in those days is they would wait for a windy day. They would put the pitchfork into the pile, throw up a bunch of the grain, which is mixed between chaff and grain, and the wind would split off the kernel from the chaff. The chaff is very light, it would blow away, and you would be left with the kernels dropping to the ground. You cannot sell a person a winnowing stick. And the reason you can't do that is while winnowing, you're allowed to winnow during Shemitah. If you have grain, you're allowed to winnow the grain during Shemitah, but only in small amounts. Again, a person would not have, we're going to learn this as we go through the Mishnayos, a person is allowed to go collect in another field all kinds of produce that is Shemitah produce. He's allowed to take some Shemitah produce from his own field. The thing you can't do is take so much that you're going to store it in your house. I'm going to go into someone's field, pick a whole pomegranate tree, and now I'll have pomegranates for the whole year of Shemitah. You're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to pick a certain amount of pomegranates that are useful for a few days. Storing Shemitah fruit, whether it's quote unquote the owner of the field, who really doesn't own the field during Shemitah, but we call him the owner of the field, or someone who comes into the field, you can't just hop and save it in your house. And that's going to be part of the laws of biur. A winnowing fork is used when a person wants to do a tremendous amount of separating the chaff from the kernels, and that means that he's using it to store the produce. And that means by selling him a winnowing fork, we're assisting him in storing produce, and therefore you cannot sell him such a winnowing fork. So the Mishnah says you can't sell the yoke, the mizreh, and the decker. The yoke, the plow, the winnowing fork. Aval mochahu magal yad umagal katsir, but you're allowed to sell him these are kinds of sickles. There are pictures of them At the bottom of page 448, the Magal Katsir, you can see, is a large sickle, picture 145. And the Magal Yad, page 144, is maybe something we're more used to seeing. It's a small sickle. The big sickle is used when a farmer goes into his field and he's going to cut down a tremendous amount of produce. The small sickle is used when he wants to go into the field and cut down just a couple of branches or some fruit, not much. So you're allowed to sell a large sickle and a small sickle because we're going to see in the Mishnah now, va'agola, you're allowed to sell a wagon. Person is a wagon dealer, and somebody wants to buy a wagon from you during Shemitah. You're allowed to sell him a wagon. We don't have to fear that he's buying a wagon because he's going to drive it to someone's field and load up his wagon in prohibited. You can't load up your wagon with someone else's pomegranates during Shemitah. You can pick some for a couple of days, but you can't load up a wagon. We don't have to fear that by selling him a wagon, we're helping him do an Avera by loading up the wagon with Shemitah fruit. Why? So now the Mishnah says the rule. Zeh haklal, this is the rule. Kol shemalachto miuchedes la'avera osem. Implements and tools that the sole purpose is to do an Avera. Somebody comes into the Home Depot, the Ace, during Shemitah and says, I'd like to buy a plow. There's only one reason to use a plow. That's to plow the ground. And you're not allowed to plow during Shemitah. So an implement that's miyuchad, it is uniquely used for prohibited purposes. You cannot sell during Shemitah to a person who we suspect violates Shemitah. However, if a Yid comes in who we know is Shomer Torah mitzvahs, and he Shomer Shvius, we don't have to ask him. He says, I want to buy a plow. You can sell him a plow. The prohibition of selling these implements is only to a person who we suspect is not keeping Shvius. Now, even to a person who we suspect is not keeping Shvius, we're allowed to sell him implements that have dual purposes. A wagon. He wants to buy a wagon. Now, what do I do? On the one hand, I say maybe he needs the wagon because he's driving it to someone's field to load it up with fruit, and I'm helping him do an Avera. On the other hand, maybe he's buying a wagon so he can take his family around. He needs a large wagon. He's buying a large wagon like he's buying a big car. He needs a way to transport his children, his family. Who knows what he needs the wagon for? So anything like a wagon that is a dual purpose, I don't have to say, oh, he's going to use it for prohibited purposes. I may assume that because the implement has a permitted purpose, I can sell it even to the Am Ha'aretz, even to the person who I suspect violates Shemitah, sell him a wagon. He's going to use it for a permitted purpose. But I can't sell the Am Ha'aretz, the person I suspect is violating Shemitah. I cannot sell him a plow, because that's a unique implement that's used only for prohibited purposes. I can't sell it to a person I suspect will use it in violation of the laws of Shvius, but I can sell it to a person who I know is Shomer Torah mitzvah, Shomer Shvius. So Zeh haklal, this is the rule. Kol shemalachta miuchedes la'avera. Any implement that is uniquely used for something that's an Avera in Shemitah, also, you can't sell it to someone you suspect will violate Shemitah. Le'isur uleheter, if it's an implement, a tool that is dual purpose, a wagon, you can use it for the wrong reason, you can use it for an okay reason. Mutter, then you can sell it even to someone who you suspect violates Shavias. Now we come to the next set of rules about what you can sell. And here the Mishnah points out to us the rule that we've been talking about. When you pick fruits that are Shemitah produce during Shemitah, there's only a certain amount you're allowed to pick. You can't walk into a field and pick someone's olive tree and take all the olives home for yourself. Prohibited. So here we're going to have an interesting halacha about how we enforce this rule. Hayotzer, a potter, somebody that makes pottery. And in those days, the potters would make jugs, and the jugs were used for oil. Person would squeeze olives, the olive oil would be placed in a jug with a cap on it. A person squeezed grapes, he put the wine into a jug and capped it, sealed it. The way you make a jug for oil is not the same way you make a jug for wine. They're made different shapes, and they're also made out of different material. Wine is much more sensitive to going sour than olive oil, and therefore there was a different material used to make a wine jug from an oil jug. Okay. Now, a person walks into the jug maker, the potter, during Shemitah, and he wants to buy a bunch of jugs. Now we have an issue coming up. If the person who walked into the store, he is a person that we suspect doesn't observe Shemitah, and he says, you know what, I'd like to buy 100 jugs of wine jugs. We have a little problem here. Why in the world does he need 100 wine jugs? That means he intends to go out and pick a tremendous amount of grapes at one time, press them, make wine, 100 jugs worth of wine, and you're not allowed to pick so many grapes to make 100 jugs of wine. So how many jugs can you sell, oil jugs or wine jugs? How much can the jug maker, the potter, how much can he sell to a person who we suspect will violate Shemitah? You see how Chazal, from these Mishnayos, thought through all of these issues. First of all, as we mentioned so many times, Chazal were confronted with this major issue in Shemitah of Oivrei Aveira. There were people who either A, they were Am Ha'oretz, they didn't know the laws, and the laws of Shemitah are very complex, as we're just touching the surface right now. They're very complex. And people were not familiar with the laws, and Chazal had to deal with that. And then Chazal had to deal with a whole group of people who were over Aveira. They intentionally didn't observe Shemitah, and we learned about those people earlier, where they would do things and they would trick us into believing that they are observing Shemitah. And Chazal had to make all kinds of rules. We talked about the rule of Sfichin. You cannot pick any vegetables, beans, grain during Shemitah because of the Gezeirah of Sfichin, the aftergrowth Gezeirah. Chazal were constantly dealing with the problem of the uneducated and the problem of those who simply don't want to observe. And Chazal had to also deal with how do we make sure that people are not overpicking the fields in a way that's prohibited. So they make rules about what you can sell, so that people don't, what kind of tools you can sell, what kind of tools you can sell. And now we're coming up to what kind of kalim, what kind of vessels can you sell? If you sell a person an exorbitant amount of jugs, you're helping him now go out and pick an impermissible amount of grapes or olives. So the Mishnah now tells us Chazal said a rule. Hayotzer, the potter, mocher chomesh kadei shemen v'chamesh esrei kadei yain. You're allowed to sell to one person 5 the Am Ha'oretz, the uneducated person, or the person who we suspect will violate Shemitah. He comes into the store and he says he'd like some jugs, oil jugs and wine jugs. You're allowed to sell him 5 oil jugs and 15 wine jugs. So a total of 20 jugs, but you cannot, as I mentioned, the jugs are made differently. You cannot sell him 20 of either kind. You can sell him 5 oil jugs. That's Chazal understood that that's a normal amount of picking. You pick olives, you squeeze them, you have 5 jugs of olive oil. That's a permissible amount of olives to have picked during Shemitah. 15 of the wine jugs. That means you picked enough grapes to squeeze into wine to make 15 jugs of wine. We do not know exactly how much these jugs contain, but Chazal deemed it appropriate that picking enough grapes to produce 15 jugs of wine, of the jugs of the size of that time, was a permissible picking of grapes. So it's 5 and 15. If the person says, I'd like 20 oil jugs or 20 wine jugs, no good. He can have 5 jugs of oil, he can have 15 jugs of wine, or he can have both. He can buy 5 and 15, but he can't exceed that amount. You can't sell him more than that amount. So the Mishnah says, Shekain daka lo havi min hafker. That's a normal amount that Chazal felt that a person who enters someone's field would pick hefker, right? We use the word hefker. It's ownerless. The field during Shemitah doesn't belong to you. So that's a normal amount for a person to go into a Shemitah field and pick enough olives to make 5 jugs of olive oil, enough grapes to make 15 jugs of wine. So therefore, that's how many jugs you can sell the Am Ha'aretz. What we're worried about is that not only will the person, you have to remember, when Shemitah comes, there's a community that is going to come into fields, right? If you drive up north, you drive down south, you see that there's sometimes kilometers of fields. They just go on and on and on and on. These are places where, for whatever reason, there are more rainy areas, less rainy areas, more sunny areas, hotter areas, different areas where the farmers know what to grow. They're growing bananas in one place they're growing oranges and lemons, whatever the place is. As soon as Shemitah comes, and we have Shemitah fruit on the tree. Remember, Shemitah begins on Rosh Hashanah. B'meher Yameinu Mashiach will come. Hayom b'Ritzon Hashem. We're going to have Tos v'Shvius, right? We add time into the 6th year, in which we're in right now. But if Hashem Mashiach doesn't come, Shemitah begins on Rosh Hashanah. The days following Rosh Hashanah, there are days immediately following Rosh Hashanah, there's no Shemitah yet. The pomegranates on the tree, the dates on the tree, the figs on the tree, the olives on the tree are all 6th-year olives. There's no Shemitah fruit yet on the tree. All of that belongs to the owner. You can't go into someone's field, Sukkot time, and start picking his grapes. Those grapes are 6th-year grapes. Shemitah starts triggering later in the Shemitah year when the pomegranates are going to become 7th-year pomegranates, and it will continue into part of the 8th year. Some of these fruits that ripen in the 7th year, remember, ripening is the trigger. Fruits ripen in the 7th and get picked in the 8th, they're Shemitah fruit. So we have an issue with Shemitah fruit, pomegranates, okay? We're in the 7th year. We know that these are pomegranates that have blossomed in the 7th year. And there's something which we discussed called shamur. You have to open your gates, and we'll talk about that when we get to the halachic portion of Rimon Sefer. A person has a garden, and his garden is completely gated in, and he's growing pomegranates and olives and dates in his garden. Unless he has a way of opening his garden, which we'll learn about, all the fruits, the Shemitah fruits that are growing in there have a great halachic problem, because they have to be hefker. And so long as you have your gate there and no one can come in, you have fruits that are shomur, and that's a very serious halachic problem during Shemitah. So this Am Ha'aretz, who wants a lot of jugs, he says, I want 50 jugs. We suspect that he can't use 50 jugs to go into one person's field, because again, we have, once the Shemitah fruit comes onto the tree, we're not talking about one Jew going into the field. Anyone can go into the field. On any given day, you can have a field of olive trees, and tens, 20s, 30s, 100 people can be walking through the field with their baskets and picking olives. The field is not open there for this one person to pick what he wants. He'd like to pick as much as he wants, but he's not allowed to. But even if he wanted to violate the law, there's not that much opportunity because there are 100 people in the field picking at the same time. If the guy got up at 6 in the morning on the day that the olives blossomed, halachically blossomed on the tree, and he's going to run through the field and pick everything, so then we have a problem with him because he picked too much. But generally speaking, people are picking Shemitah fruits at the same time, and nobody's really going to have a serious opportunity to pick entire trees because he's competing with a lot of people. But what we're worried about is that this Am Ha'aretz who wants 50 jugs, he's going to go into a field, and he's going to pick as much as he can from a Shemitah field. And then he's going to make his way into a field that's shomor, that's gated, and the owner has violated Shemitah by not opening his field. That's one problem. But now the fruits, the produce that's in this closed field present a halachic problem, and they may be prohibited from being eaten. They are fruits of Shemitah that are not hefker. They are shomor. The owner refuses to make them hefker. And this person's going to sneak his way into the field and pick some of that too. So we have a problem with the person, the Am Ha'aretz, who is not shomer Shemitah, either uneducated or intentionally. He wants a lot of jugs because not only is he going to pick from a Shemitah field, but there's only so much you can pick because he's competing with everyone. He's going to go into other fields where Shemitah is not being observed, and he'll pick from there too, and those fruits may not be picked. So we don't want to help him by giving him so many jugs that he can violate Shemitah. So therefore, we sell him 5 jugs of oil, 15 jugs for wine. Shekein dakolov mehefker. That's a normal amount Chazal saw in those days. A person goes out during Shemitah, picks a certain amount of olives that are a normal amount. From that, he can squeeze 5 jugs of olive oil. He goes into a vineyard during Shemitah and he picks Shemitah grapes. He presses them. He's able to make 15 jugs of wine. That's a normal amount of grapes to pick. So therefore, you can sell the Am Ha'aretz 5 oil jugs and 15 wine jugs. Now the Mishnah says, till now we were talking about the Am Ha'aretz walks into the jug maker, the potter, and he says, this is how many jugs I'd like. I'd like 50. So the owner of the store, the potter, says, I'm sorry, I can sell you 5 oil jugs and 15 wine jugs. That's what the Chachamim said I'm allowed to do, and that's all I can sell you. Okay. Now, it could very well be that he goes into the next potter or the next jug maker and says, I'd like to buy 5 and 15 from you also. So in those days, there were no apps, there's no faxes, there's no telegrams, there's no computers. We couldn't put down you couldn't register people in a computer and write down Reuven purchased Reuven to Datzahut, so-and-so purchased 5 jugs of oil and 15 jugs of wine, and it now would be available on a database. And if he walked into another store, they plug in his 2 Datzahut and they would say, oh, you already bought 5 and 15. Sorry, you can't have any more today. Okay, we don't have that kind of, that kind of system wasn't available. And also, generally speaking, in those days, in small communities, you didn't have a Home Depot on top of an Ace, on top of a hardware store, on top of a Kobo. Generally speaking, there was the potter, the fish market. So there's there's only so much that Chazal were able to control during those days. And as far as I am concerned, I am a potter. He walked into my shop. I can sell him 5 jugs of oil and 15 jugs of wine. What he does after that, I can't control. But to the extent that Chazal were able to make sure that I didn't violate Lifnei Evil or Sitei Mirshal, don't assist someone doing an Aveira, I didn't do anything wrong. I sold him 5 and 15. This is before he picked any fruits in a field, before he went to the vineyard, and before he went to the olive tree field. And he says, I want jugs because I'm going to the field to pick. So the rule is 5 and 15. V'im hevi yoser mikan, the Mishnah says, but what happens if the Am Ha'oretz, we're on page 449, what happens if the Am Ha'oretz actually already did his picking? He already picked. And he has his wagon outside your pottery store. And he says, I need 25 olive jugs and 25 wine jugs. At that point, the Mishnah says, mutter. Then you're allowed to sell him as many jugs as he wants. And this is a very interesting halach. After the Am Ha'oretz has already collected the grapes and the olives, and I see it in his wagon, or I know he has in his house, we do not suspect that he did anything that is prohibited during Shemitah. It's a very interesting halakha, and there are a lot of ramifications to this, which we don't have time to go into today. Before the Am Ha'oretz goes out to do any picking of olives and any picking of grapes, I can only sell him 5 jugs for olive oil and 15 jugs for wine, because I suspect he may pick things that he's not allowed to pick more than he's allowed to, and I don't want to assist him in doing an aved. However, once he appears with olives and he appears with the grapes, or I know he has them already at home, and he asks me for 20 jugs of wine and 20 jugs of oil, I can sell it to him because he already has it, and at that time, I don't have to suspect that he did an Aveira. It's only before he's going out to pick that I have to make sure I don't help him to do an Aveira in the future. Once everything is already in his home or it's in his wagon, I don't have to suspect that he did an Aveira in the past. Lifnei evil ositein mikshal means in front of a blind person, don't place a stumbling block, meaning going into the future. So if he's going to go out to pick, the limit is 5 olive oil jugs and 15 wine jugs. If he's already picked, then I can sell him as many jugs as he wants, because I don't have to suspect that he has already violated the law. I suspect that he may do it, and therefore I'm limited in what I can sell him, but I don't have to suspect that he did it, and what I see in front of me is prohibited fruit. Then I can sell him as much as he wants, and that's why the Mishnah says, Vim hevi yoser mikan. But if he brought more than this, page 449, mutter, then it is permitted to sell him as many jugs as he wants. If you want to enjoy the pictures are at the bottom of page 449. Umoicha lanachrim ba'aretz. You're allowed to sell as many jugs as you want to a goy in Eretz Yisrael. A goy is not mechuyev to keep Shemitah, and that itself is a very, very, very complicated subject. There's a machlokes im yesh koach la'akum lahafkia midei kedusha. When a goy owns land in Eretz Yisrael, does the land still have kedusha, and therefore we have to enforce Shemitah even on land that a goy owns? Or do we say ein koach biyad akum lafkia? No, a goy can't take out this, because a goy happens to have a deed on a piece of land in Eretz Yisrael, he doesn't remove its kedusha, and we have to enforce Shemitah in his field as well. So here the Mishnah says that you're allowed to sell as many jugs as you want to a goy, and here the point is that by selling it to a goy, do I have to worry that a goy is doing it for business? In other words, I'm going to sell a couple of plows, or I'm going to sell 100 jugs to a goy, and the guy is going to sell them at a profit to Jews. I don't have to worry about that. Again, I myself am going to observe the rules of Chazal. I'm only going to sell 5 oil jugs and 15 great wine jugs to another Yid who's an Amma Oretz. A guy could care less. He's just interested in profit. So if I sell 500 jugs to a guy, do I have to worry that the guy is now going to start reselling them to Jews who are Amaratza? The answer is no. You can sell as many jugs as you want to a guy during Shemitah. Ul Yisrael v'chutz la'aretz, and you can sell as many jugs as you want to a Jew in chutz la'aretz. And I don't have to worry that the Jew who's in chutz la'aretz is going to bring his jugs to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, he may use them in violation of Shemitah. I sold it to him in chutz la'aretz. I don't have to worry about the fact that he's going to bring them to Eretz Yisrael and violate Shemitah with them. Okay. The Rav, if you take a look at page 450 at the top of the page, the Rav has another pshat which raises a whole new halacha. Top of the line on page 450, Inami, a second pshat in why you are permitted to sell a Yid as many jugs as he wants if you're selling it to him in chutz la'aretz. Shemiyachnes l'toichem yayin v'shemen shel shvius shehevi me'eretz Yisrael. You're not allowed to take the fruits of shvius outside Eretz Yisrael. Very, very big problem. Why? We'll get to it in a moment. A person comes to Eretz Yisrael, he picks his pomegranates during the 7th year, and he wants to go back to his house in America. He wants it's nice. He's going to bring back Shvius fruits for his family and friends. They're going to keep all the rules of Shemitah. They're going to eat it properly. They're going to suck out all the juice. They're not going to ruin it. Beautiful. Nice gift to bring back all your good buddies in chutz la'aretz. You're not allowed to take Peirush Shvius to chutz la'aretz. This is one of the problems that comes up when esrogim grow in Eretz Yisrael and they have kedusha Shvius. Can they be shipped to chutz la'aretz? And that becomes a very big problem because Eretz Yisrael ships a tremendous amount of esrogim to chutz la'aretz. Shemitah becomes a problem. A Shemitah esrog, can you send it to chutz la'aretz as kedusha shvius? We'll get to those halachas as well. Now remember, again, a fruit becomes shvius if it was halachically blossomed during shvius. So Mashiach should come b'mhev yamein b'rtzayin Hashem today. Yirtzeh Hashem next year, Sukkot Tafshin Pei Beis. Tafshin Pei Beis is Shemitah. There's no problem in Tafshin Pei Beis with esrogim, because any esrogim you buy next year, Sukkot Tafshin Pei Beis, are esrogim that blossom this year, the 6th year. They are not Shemitah esrogim. So there's no esrogim problem next year during Shemitah. The esrogim problem occur the following year, in the 8th year, or what we call the 1st year of the cycle. The year after Shemitah, those esrogim will have blossomed in the 7th year. Now you have Shemitah esrogim, and you're not allowed to sell esrogim. You're not allowed to sell Shemitah fruit. So how do you buy esrogim in the 8th year? So we'll learn about that as well. So the Rav now says, Inami shemi yachnes l'tochem yayin v'shemen shel shvius shehevi me'eretz Yisrael l'chmiru chacham kol kach. We don't have to suspect that maybe we have a Yid here who brought olives and grapes from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz, and now he wants to buy a tremendous amount of jugs in chutz la'aretz so that he can make wine and olive oil out of those olives and grapes that he picked in Eretz Yisrael, which you're not allowed to bring to chutz la'aretz. We don't have to worry about such a thing. and therefore you're allowed to sell as many jugs as you want to a Jew in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, we'll stop here for today. There are additional halachas about what you can sell, and there'll be a halacha about in Mishnah Tes about women baking together during Shemitah. Can you bake together with a woman who you suspect is not keeping Shemitah? Again, Chazal have to deal with this problem of not everybody keeping Shemitah and making sure that the laws are observed to the extent possible.